The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air filters. Ethan Carter lay asleep in his cabin aboard Solace 12, a human-made space habitat orbiting far beyond Mars. He dreamed of calm oceans and warm sunlight, things he had not seen for many years. The habitat had no windows in private rooms, only smooth walls, dim lights, and the faint scent of sterilized air. Then the sound came. At first it was soft, a faint, distant thump. Ethan stirred, but did not open his eyes. He thought it was just the usual sound of the habitat's machinery. But then a sharper noise followed, a muffled, deep boom, as if something heavy had struck the station's hull. He woke instantly. The lights in his room flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere beyond his door, a quiet alarm was beeping. Not the loud, high-pitched emergency alarm, but a slower, deeper tone. He had never heard it before. Ethan sat up, confused. His work shifts rarely involved danger. As a systems engineer, his life was routine. Check energy levels, maintain oxygen recycling, adjust temperature controls. The most exciting thing he had faced in years was a small leak in a water pipe. Then the door to his cabin opened. Standing there was Lyra, his maid. She had worked for him for the last 6 months. She was quiet, polite, and efficient. Always. Wearing the same neat gray uniform, always speaking in a soft voice. She cleaned his room, brought him meals, and sometimes reminded him to take breaks when he got too focused on his work. She was the type of person you could pass in the corridor and barely notice. But now, she looked completely different. Her uniform was replaced with a black, tight-fitting suit made from some strange material that shimmered faintly in the dim light. In her hands was a long, sleek weapon, nothing like the station's standard security rifles. Its surface was smooth and metallic, but with sharp lines that looked alien. Her eyes met his. They were no longer calm. They were sharp, focused, and full of urgency. "They found us," she said. Her voice was steady, but the words cut through Ethan like ice. "What?" he asked, still half in disbelief. "There's no time," she replied, stepping quickly into the room. She reached the far wall, touched a panel he didn't know existed, and a small hatch slid open with a hiss. "Get inside." Ethan sat frozen for a moment. "Lyra? What is going on? Who found us?" She turned to him, and for the first time, he noticed something strange. Her posture. The way she held the weapon. The way she scanned the room. It was the stance of a trained soldier. "Ethan," she said, her tone firm. "Move." Still stunned, he climbed out of bed and stepped toward her. "Lyra, I am not just your maid," she interrupted. "Not tonight. They've breached the outer ring. Security will hold them off for as long as they can, but you are their target." He stopped mid-step. "Target? Why me?" "Because of what you've built," she said without looking at him, already checking the corridor outside his door. "Now hurry." Ethan's mind was a storm of questions. What had he built? His research was just theoretical. Experimental AI core designs, yes, but nothing dangerous. Nothing worth attacking a space habitat for. At least, that's what he had believed. Another deep vibration shook the floor beneath them. Somewhere far away, something metallic groaned. The alarm's slow beeping continued, steady but ominous. Lyra stepped to his side, her free hand gripping his arm. "We can't stay here," she said. "They will breach this section in minutes." Ethan swallowed hard and stepped toward the hatch she had opened. It led into a narrow maintenance tunnel, dimly lit with strips of yellow light. The air inside smelled faintly of machine oil. He hesitated at the opening. "Lyra, I don't understand any of this." "You don't need to understand," she replied. "You just need to survive." She pushed him inside and followed, sealing the hatch. Behind them, the space was cramped, barely wide enough for them to crawl through on their hands and knees. Every few meters, pipes and cables crossed the path. The hum of the station's systems was louder here, vibrating through the metal walls. They moved. Quickly. Lyra kept the weapon ready at all times, glancing back every few seconds to check behind them. Ethan's heart pounded as he followed her. He could hear faint sounds in the distance, dull thuds, metallic clanks, and once, something that sounded disturbingly like claws scraping against steel. "What are they?" he whispered. "The Karen," she said quietly. He had never heard the name before. "They don't trade. They don't negotiate. They erase," Lyra continued, her voice low. "When they find a species that could surpass them, they make sure it never happens." Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "And you're saying they think humans are one of those species?" "They know," she corrected. "Because of you." He wanted to protest, to say that he was just a systems engineer, just one person in a massive research network. But deep down, he realized there was something in his work that might have attracted attention. His last project had been different, more powerful than he had admitted, even to himself. They stopped at a cross-section of tunnels. Lyra pressed her ear to the metal wall, listening. A faint, alien clicking noise echoed from somewhere close. She signaled for silence. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. In the dim light, he could see sweat forming on her forehead, though her expression stayed focused. After a long, tense moment, she motioned for him to follow again. They continued through the maze of tunnels until they reached another hatch. Lyra paused, checked her weapon, then pressed a sequence of buttons on a hidden keypad. The hatch opened into a wider space, a storage compartment filled with sealed supply crates. "This is a temporary safe point," she said, moving one crate in front of the hatch to block it. "We'll rest for a minute, then move again." Ethan leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His mind was still spinning. His maid was not a maid. His research had attracted an alien hunting party. And somewhere out there, those same aliens were moving through the station looking for him. "Lyra," he said after a moment. "How long have you been whatever you really are?" She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Since before we met, my job was always to protect you. I hoped I'd never have to do it like this." Ethan stared at her, the weapon still in her hands, the quiet alarm still echoing faintly through the metal walls. He realized then that nothing in his life was as simple as it had seemed, and from the way she was listening to the distant noises, he knew their danger was far from over. The storage compartment was dim, the only light coming from a single panel high on the wall. Lyra stood near the hatch, weapon ready, her head tilted slightly as she listened. Ethan sat on one of the supply crates, still trying to calm his racing heart. He wanted answers. "Lyra," he began, "you said you've been protecting me, but protecting me from what? And what does my work have to do with it?" She kept her gaze on the hatch as she spoke. "You've been working on an experimental human-AI fusion system. You think of it as just another project, but the Karen see it as a threat. They have destroyed dozens of civilizations before they could reach your level of technology. They do not wait for war. They end it before it begins." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. I never released my research. It's just stored here, in the station's secure systems." "Secure to you?" she said, her voice steady. "But not to them. They watch. They scan for signals, data structures, energy patterns. Your work has been noticed." He tried to process her words. "So, you've been here all this time, working as a maid, just to keep an eye on me?" Her eyes softened for a moment. "Yes. My cover allowed me to stay close without attracting attention. I was trained for combat, intelligence gathering, and close protection. The maid uniform was just part of the job." Ethan almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the situation felt unreal. The quiet woman who had dusted his desk and served him coffee was now talking like a covert agent from some secret human defense force. Another faint vibration passed through the walls. This one was sharper, like a short metallic snap. Lyra's head turned toward the sound instantly. "They're moving through the lower decks," she said quietly. "We can't stay here much longer." Ethan hesitated. "You said security was holding them off. Can't we just wait until they deal with it?" "They're not holding them off," Lyra replied. "They're slowing them down. The Kar-Wren's tactics are too advanced. This station will fall unless we escape." She moved to one of the crates, pulling it open. Inside were sealed rations, water packs, and a small field kit. She tossed him a slim, wrist-mounted device. "Wear this," she said. Ethan strapped it on. The device was smooth, with a faint blue light on the side. "What does it do?" "It tracks your vital signs and location," she explained. "If we get separated, I can find you. It also has an emergency beacon, but we can't use it unless we're outside the Kar-Wren's jamming field." Ethan looked at the weapon in her hands. "You're expecting a fight, aren't you?" She gave a small nod. "There will be one." The words hung in the air like a shadow. They slipped back into the maintenance tunnel, closing the hatch behind them. The narrow space felt even more confining now, the walls pressing in with every crawl forward. Ethan could feel his palms sweating as he followed her. "Lyra," he whispered. "What exactly do these Kar-Wren look like?" She did not slow down. "You'll know them when you see them." That answer did nothing to ease his nerves. They turned a corner and entered a vertical shaft with a ladder running along one wall. Lyra began climbing quickly, the weapon slung across her back. Ethan followed, trying not to look down. The shaft seemed to go on forever, disappearing into darkness below. Halfway up, a sound echoed from below. A soft, rapid clicking. It was followed by a metallic thud, then another. The sounds were getting closer. Lyra stopped climbing. Her body tensed, and she reached for her weapon. "Keep moving," she whispered. Ethan's throat went dry. He climbed faster, his arms aching. The clicking grew louder, echoing up the shaft until it felt like the walls themselves were making the noise. They reached the top and crawled into another tunnel. Lyra sealed the hatch behind them and tapped a small control on her wrist. A faint hum filled the air, some kind of signal. "What was that?" Ethan asked, panting. "A scrambler," she said. "It hides our exact location for a few minutes. Not perfect, but it will buy time." They moved again, finally reaching a wider maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the station's main power conduits. Here the floor was solid and they could stand. Lyra slowed her pace, keeping her weapon ready. "Our goal is the auxiliary shuttle bay," she said. "It's smaller and less obvious than the main one. If the Kar-Wren haven't found it yet, we might escape." Ethan nodded but stayed close. Every flicker of the lights made him glance over his shoulder. As they walked, he asked, "If they're so powerful, why haven't they attacked Earth directly?" Lyra glanced at him. "They don't move openly until they're certain they've found the most dangerous part of a species. You are that part for humanity right now." The weight of her words sank into him. He wasn't just in danger. He was the reason everyone on the station was in danger. The corridor opened into a junction room with multiple doorways. Lyra froze immediately, raising a hand for him to stop. Ethan saw it too. Faint shadows, moving across the opposite wall, accompanied by that same clicking sound. She gestured silently toward a side hatch. They moved quickly, slipping inside and closing it softly. The room they entered was full of old machinery and storage racks, through a narrow gap in the door. Ethan saw them. The Kar-Wren were tall, at least 2 meters, with long segmented armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal over their bodies. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, and their weapons were built into their forearms. The faint, rhythmic clicking came from their breathing or maybe from some inner mechanism. They paused near the junction, scanning the air with strange, needle-like sensors. Ethan held his breath. One of them turned its head slightly toward their hiding place. Lyra's grip on her weapon tightened. Her voice was barely a whisper. "If they breach this room, stay behind me no matter what happens." Ethan's heartbeat was so loud he was sure they could hear it. Then, just as suddenly, the car wren moved on, disappearing into another corridor. Lyra waited a full 10 seconds before lowering her weapon. She gave Ethan a look that was part warning, part reassurance. "We keep moving," she said. As they slipped deeper into the shadows of the station, Ethan realized this was only the beginning. The car wren were here for him, and Lyra was the only reason he was still alive. The corridor ahead was dim, the flickering emergency lights making the shadows shift and twist on the walls. Ethan followed close behind Lyra, his breath uneven. Every step felt like it might be their last. The clicking sounds of the car wren were faint now, but he knew they were never far away. They moved quickly, taking narrow service passages instead of the main halls. The air was warmer here, filled with the faint smell of heated metal. Ethan could feel vibrations under his boots, the kind that meant the station's outer hull was being struck again and again. "Where are we going now?" Ethan whispered. "The auxiliary shuttle bay," Lyra replied without turning her head. "If the car wren have not found it, we can escape. If they have—" She didn't finish the sentence. They turned into another maintenance tunnel, this, one lower and tighter than the rest. Lyra crouched as she moved, her weapon angled forward. Ethan ducked under a hanging cable, feeling it brush the back of his neck. Suddenly, Lyra froze. Ethan nearly bumped into her. "What is it?" he whispered. She raised a hand for silence and tilted her head. The clicking was back, louder this time, closer. It echoed from somewhere ahead. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes sharp. "They're in front of us," she murmured. Before Ethan could react, a burst of light flared at the end of the tunnel. The cold, blue-white glow of alien weapon fire. Lyra yanked him sideways, shoving him behind a stack of metal crates. Energy blasts struck the walls where they had been standing, leaving scorched, smoking marks. "Stay down!" she ordered. Ethan crouched low, his back pressed against the cold metal. He peeked around the corner just long enough to see them, two car wren advancing down the tunnel. They moved in perfect coordination, one stepping forward while the other covered, their glowing forearm weapons pointed straight ahead. Lyra was already moving. She darted from cover to cover, her movements swift and precise. When she fired, her weapon made no loud bang, just a sharp thunk followed by a burst of blue energy. One of the car wrens staggered as the shot hit its shoulder, but it didn't. "Fall! They have armor!" Ethan shouted. "I know!" Lyra called back. She switched her aim, targeting the joints where the armor plates overlapped. Another shot hit, and this time, one of the alien's legs gave way. It collapsed, hissing in a strange, clicking growl. The second car wren advanced faster, its weapon firing in short, precise bursts. Lyra ducked behind the crates again, motioning for Ethan to stay back. She reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a small, flat disc. "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Flash charge," she said, pressing a button on the side. "Close your eyes when I throw it." Before he could answer, she rolled it across the floor toward the alien. It stopped just short of the car wren's feet, then exploded, in a burst of blinding white light and high-pitched sound. Ethan clamped his eyes shut and covered his ears. When he opened them again, the alien was stumbling, its movements jerky. Lyra fired twice more, her shot striking the exposed neck joint. The car wren fell still. Ethan stared at the two fallen attackers. The one that was still moving let out a strange, rattling noise, almost like a warning, before Lyra stepped forward and disabled its weapon. "They'll know we're here now," she said grimly. "We have to move faster." Ethan's voice was shaky. That was the first time I've seen them up close." "They will send more," she replied, "and the next group will be harder to stop." They moved again, stepping over the fallen Kara-Ren. Ethan couldn't stop glancing at them. The armor looked seamless, almost grown rather than built. There were no obvious helmets. Their heads were covered in a natural-looking shell that glistened faintly in the dim light. As they continued, the vibrations under their feet grew stronger. Somewhere nearby, the station's structure groaned, the sound deep and heavy. Ethan knew the outer hull couldn't take endless hits. They passed. Through another narrow passage and into a larger section of the station, a cargo transfer bay. The space was wide and open, filled with suspended catwalks and tall stacks of supply containers. The high ceiling echoed every sound, making Ethan's own footsteps seem too loud. Lyra scanned the area carefully before stepping forward. "We need to cross to the other side," she said. "There's a direct route to the shuttle bay from there." They made it halfway across before Ethan heard it, a faint metallic thud from above. He looked up. On the catwalk overhead, shadows moved. "Lyra," he whispered. "Above us." She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Run," she said simply. Before Ethan could question her, energy blasts rained down from the catwalk. They sprinted between the stacks of crates, the air around them crackling with heat. Lyra returned fire, hitting one of the figures above and sending it crashing down to the floor. Another alien leapt from the catwalk, landing heavily in front of them. Its weapon was already raised. Lyra shoved Ethan aside and fired point-blank into its chest joint. The alien staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it swung a long, bladed arm attachment at her. She dodged, the blade slicing through the air where her head had been. She fired again, this time hitting the exposed neck joint. The alien collapsed. Ethan crawled to his feet. "We can't keep doing this," he shouted. Lyra didn't answer. She was already scanning the catwalks for more movement. "Come on!" she called, waving him toward the far door. They ran, weaving between crates until they reached the exit. Lyra sealed the heavy door behind them, locking it with an override code. For the first time in minutes, the only sound was their breathing. Ethan leaned against the wall. "How many of them are on the station?" "At least a full strike team," she said. "Maybe more. We need to reach the shuttle bay before they cut us off completely." He nodded, still shaken. The image of the Kara-Ren falling under Lyra's fire and the way they kept moving even when hit stayed in his mind. They weren't like any enemy he had imagined. As they moved down the next corridor, Ethan realized something else. The Kara-Ren weren't just here to kill. They were hunting. Every movement, every coordinated attack, it all pointed to one goal: finding him. And now they knew exactly which direction he was heading. The corridors felt tighter now, as if the station itself was closing in on them. The faint smell of burnt metal hung in the air, a reminder of the battles they had just survived. Ethan's legs ached from running, but Lyra showed no sign of slowing. Her focus was fixed ahead, her weapon steady in her hands. They reached a sealed bulkhead door. Lyra stopped and checked the small control panel beside it. "We can't take the main route to the shuttle bay anymore," she said. "The Kara-Ren have blocked it." Ethan leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "So what now? We can't keep dodging them forever." Lyra's eyes flicked to him. "We might not need to dodge them if we can shut them down." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced at the control panel again before answering. "The station's fusion core isn't just a power source. If we overload it in the right way, it will create a massive electromagnetic pulse that could disable all the Kara-Ren's systems, weapons, armor, ships, for long enough to escape." Ethan's stomach tightened. "And what happens to the station if we do that?" Lyra's silence was the answer. He shook his head. "You're talking about destroying the whole place. There are still people here." "I know," she said quietly. "It's the last option. But if the Kara-Ren succeed in taking you, the number of people at risk will be far greater than the ones here right now." Ethan looked away. The thought of causing that kind of destruction made his chest feel heavy. But the thought of the Karen using his research, that was worse. "They won't let me near the fusion core controls," he said after a moment. "It's locked behind level 4 security." Lyra gave him a faint, almost amused look. "Ethan, you designed part of that security. I'm guessing you can get past it." He sighed. "Yes. But the core's systems are delicate. If I mess it up, the explosion could happen before we're ready." "Then don't mess it up," she said simply. Another distant vibration shook the corridor. This one was deeper, the kind that rattled the walls. Lyra's expression hardened. "They're getting closer. We need to decide now." Ethan met her eyes. "All right, we do it." She nodded and started moving. "The fusion core chamber is on the lower engineering deck. Follow me." They moved quickly, taking maintenance routes wherever possible. Every so often, they had to stop and listen for the faint clicking that signaled the Kara-Wren's approach. Twice, they heard it close by, and Lyra pulled Ethan into small side compartments until the sound faded. When they reached the lower deck, the air was hotter. The hum of the station's main systems was loud here, almost like a constant growl. In the background, the corridor ahead was marked with bright red hazard signs. Lyra stopped at the door to the fusion control room. It was heavily reinforced, with a large security scanner beside it. "Your turn," she said. Ethan stepped up to the panel. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, bypassing the first layer of access. The second layer took longer. He had to input a sequence of maintenance codes from memory, each one granting partial clearance. The final lock was biometric. He placed his hand on the scanner. The panel blinked red at first, then green. The heavy door slid open with a hiss. The fusion core chamber was a huge circular room. In the center, a massive cylindrical reactor glowed with a soft blue light, surrounded by thick metal supports. Energy conduits ran from it like veins, disappearing into the walls and floor. The air was thick with heat, and the faint smell of ozone. Ethan moved straight to the control console. "I'll need a few minutes to adjust the overload sequence," he said. "You have 2, Lyra replied, taking up a defensive position near the entrance. Ethan's hands flew over the console, pulling up system diagrams and safety protocols. He had to disable multiple safeguards just to get access to the overload controls. Each step made his chest feel tighter. There would be no turning back once he reached a certain point. Behind him, Lyra's voice came, low and tense. "We have company." Ethan risked a glance. 3 Kara-Wren had entered the room, moving with silent precision. Their weapons were already raised. Lyra fired first, forcing them to scatter. Energy blasts sizzled past her, striking the walls and leaving smoking marks. She moved from cover to cover, returning fire whenever she had an opening. "Ethan, how?" "Much longer," she called. "Almost there," he shouted, his voice shaking. One of the Kara-Wren leapt onto a high support beam and aimed down at her. She saw it at the last second, rolling aside as its shot scorched the floor where she had been standing. She fired upward, hitting its side. It fell heavily to the ground. The second alien advanced directly toward Ethan. Lyra broke cover, sprinting across the room to intercept it. She slid low, firing into its leg joint. It stumbled, giving her the chance to finish it with a precise shot to the neck. The third one was still out there, circling. Ethan could hear its footsteps but couldn't see it from his position. His fingers kept moving, forcing the last override. The console beeped, and a warning message flashed on the screen. "Core overload sequence armed." "Got it!" he yelled. The last Kara-Wren appeared suddenly, charging straight at him. Lyra fired, but it dodged, moving faster than the others. It raised its weapon, and Ethan slammed his hand down on the activation control. The reactor flared brighter, sending out a deep, vibrating hum that shook the floor. The alien hesitated, its sensors reacting to the sudden spike in energy. That moment was enough for Lyra to fire a clean shot into its exposed neck joint. "Move!" she shouted. They ran, for the door, the air behind them growing hotter by the second. The hum of the reactor was turning into a loud, pulsing throb. Ethan knew the electromagnetic pulse would be released in less than 2 minutes. As the heavy door sealed behind them, he glanced back once. The soft blue glow of the reactor was already shifting toward a dangerous white. Lyra grabbed his arm. "We have to get to the escape pods now. The pulse will hit everything, including the station's life support." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. He had done it, but now they had to survive the consequences. The alarm was no longer a slow, distant tone. Now it was sharp and fast, echoing through the station like a heartbeat in panic. The fusion core's overload countdown had started, and every second they stayed on Solace 12 brought them closer to destruction. Ethan ran behind Lyra through the narrow corridor. The floor vibrated under their boots, the steady hum of the reactor now replaced by a rising, pulsing throb. The air was growing hotter. "How long until the pulse?" Ethan shouted. "Over the noise." "Less than 2 minutes," Lyra answered without looking back. "We need to be in the pods before it hits, or it will fry the pod systems too." They turned a corner and stopped dead. 3 Karrens stood in the hallway ahead, blocking the route to the escape pods. Their armor glistened under the emergency lights and their weapons were already raised. Lyra reacted instantly, shoving Ethan into a side alcove. "Stay low," she ordered, then fired the first shot. The corridor exploded with noise, the sharp thuds of Lyra's weapon, the searing blasts from the Karren's arms. Sparks flew from the walls as energy bolts struck, leaving blackened scars in the metal. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. He wanted to help, but he had nothing. No weapon, no armor, no training. All he could do was wait for an opening. Lyra moved like she had been in 100 fights before. She ducked behind a bulkhead, popped out to fire, then shifted positions. Before the Karren could target her, one alien went down, a shot piercing the joint in its leg, but the other 2 advanced. "They're trying to box us in," she called. Ethan's eyes darted around. A maintenance hatch was just above him. He grabbed the handle and pulled it open, revealing a narrow crawl space that ran parallel to the corridor. "Lyra!" he shouted. "There's another way around!" She fired again to keep the Karren's attention, then sprinted toward him. They climbed into the crawl space together, the sound of energy blasts ringing below. The space was cramped, forcing them to move on hands and knees, but it led toward the escape pod section. They had almost reached the end when the metal above them groaned. Something slammed into the crawl space from the outside, making the walls dent inward. The clicking sound returned, louder than ever. "They've found us," Lyra said grimly. Before Ethan could react, the metal burst open and a Karren's arm reached in, its claw-like hand grabbing for Lyra. She twisted away, firing point-blank into the exposed limb. The alien recoiled with a sharp metallic hiss. "We can't stay in here," Lyra said, kicking open the exit panel. They dropped into another corridor, only to find more Karren approaching from the far end. Ethan's pulse spiked. "We're surrounded." "Not yet," Lyra said, her tone calm but firm. She pointed to a service ladder leading up to an overhead platform. "Go!" Ethan climbed, his hands slipping from sweat. Lyra followed, firing down at the advancing aliens. One shot struck an exposed neck joint, sending a Karren crashing to the floor. The others returned fire, forcing her to duck. They reached the platform and ran across it, heading toward a heavy blast door at the far end. Beyond it, Ethan knew, were the escape pods, but the blast door wasn't open. "It's sealed," Ethan said, panic creeping into his voice. "Then unseal it," Lyra replied, taking position to cover him. Ethan's fingers flew over the control panel. The system was slow to respond, probably strained by the overload sequence, and each second felt like an hour. Behind him, Lyra kept firing, the air filling with the hiss of energy bolts and the smell of scorched metal. A car wren's shot hit the wall just beside Ethan, showering him with sparks. "Anytime now," Lyra called. "I'm trying," Ethan shouted. The panel beeped, then flashed green. The blast door began to open with a deep mechanical groan. "Go!" Lyra ordered. They dashed through as soon as the gap was wide enough. Lyra hit the emergency close switch and the door slammed shut behind them. The sound of heavy impacts followed almost immediately as the car wren tried to break through. The escape pod bay was a round chamber lined with small single-use pods. Each was shaped like a smooth capsule, designed for short-distance emergency launches. Lyra pointed to one of the pods. "Get inside and prepare for launch." Ethan hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," she said. "I just need to make sure they can't stop us." She ran to the control console at the side of the bay and began inputting commands. Ethan climbed into the pod, strapping himself into the seat. The pod's systems came online with a soft hum. Through the pod's open hatch, he saw Lyra working, fast, sealing the launch bay doors and overriding safety locks. But then the blast door at the far end of the chamber groaned again. Cracks of light appeared along its edges as the car wren forced it open. "Lyra!" Ethan shouted. "I see them," she replied, pulling her weapon. She fired as the first alien stepped through, its armor glowing faintly under the bay's lights. Another followed, then a third. Lyra's shots were precise, but there were too many. One blast grazed her shoulder, spinning her slightly. She dropped to one knee but kept firing, her face set in determination. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to get out and help her, but he knew he'd only slow her down. Instead, he reached over to the pod's external controls and activated the remote door seal. The pod's hatch began to close. Lyra saw what he was doing. She fired one last burst to force the aliens back, then sprinted for the pod. She dove inside just as the hatch sealed shut. "Hold on," she said, slamming the launch control. The pod's thrusters ignited, and they shot out of the bay into the blackness of space. The station grew smaller behind them, its metal frame trembling under the strain of the overload. Ethan stared out the small viewport, his chest tight. They had escaped, but the pulse hadn't gone off yet. "It's going to hit any second," Lyra said quietly. Ethan nodded, gripping the seat's edges. Whatever happened next would decide whether humanity had just survived its first real alien encounter or lost everything. The pod shuddered violently as its thrusters pushed it farther from Solace 12. Ethan gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. The stars outside were cold and distant, yet the blue glow of the fusion core behind them seemed almost alive, pulsing, like a heartbeat of the station. "Countdown to the pulse," Ethan asked, his voice trembling. 30 seconds, Lyra said calmly, though the sharp set of her jaw betrayed the tension. 30 seconds. That was all the time they had to survive before the electromagnetic pulse tore through the station and disabled every system, including weapons, shields, and possibly the hull's structural integrity. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Are we going to make it?" "We have to," Lyra said firmly. "Hold on to that thought. Don't think about the rest." She activated the pod's external shield, a temporary barrier that could withstand minor debris impacts. The Kararan. Ships had not yet arrived at the station, but the strike team they had fought inside the corridors was still out there, potentially coordinating for an ambush. Ethan swallowed hard. The image of their alien armor, their relentless precision, and the way they had hunted him like prey lingered in his mind. "They're fast," he said. Lyra glanced at him. "They underestimate humans. That's their mistake." He didn't respond immediately. Could humans really stand against a species like the Kar-Ren? But watching Lyra, her courage, skill, and strategy gave him a flicker of hope. Perhaps humans were stronger than they realized. The pod's systems displayed the countdown: 20, 19, 18. Lyra's hand hovered over the emergency override. "Brace yourself," she said. Suddenly, a distant shock wave rocked the pod. The station's hull shuddered violently as the first energy pulse escaped from the core. The electromagnetic pulse raced outward, a silent wave of pure energy. All at once, the blackness of space around the station lit with flashes as electronic systems failed. Lights on the hull flickered and went out. The Karen strike team, still on patrol, staggered as their weapons and sensors shut down. Their armor glowed faintly, then dimmed, leaving them vulnerable. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. It worked. Lyra's expression remained focused. "The pulse will last only a few minutes. That's all we have to escape and regroup." The pod shot forward, distancing itself from the chaos. Through the viewport, Ethan watched as the station, now dark except for the pulsing glow of the fusion core, trembled under the energy release. Sparks flew from exposed conduits, and small explosions echoed across its surface. Solace 12 had survived, but only barely. "Are the others safe?" Ethan asked quietly. Lyra's eyes flicked toward the station. "Some will make it. Some—" She didn't finish. The pause said enough. Ethan swallowed. He had learned a lot in these hours about fear, courage, and the harsh reality of survival. But the truth was clear. Humanity had just taken its first step in showing the Karen they could not be easily erased. The pod's sensors blinked. Other escape pods had launched from different sections of the station, carrying scientists, engineers, and civilians. Many were small ships, but they were all moving away from the pulse's epicenter. Lyra leaned back, letting out a breath. "We're clear for now," she said. Ethan finally looked at her properly. "Lyra, I don't think I ever thanked you." She gave him a small, almost wry smile. "I don't expect thanks. I expect you to survive and keep building, to make sure humans can defend themselves if the Karen ever come back." Her words struck him. The weight of responsibility settled in his chest. He had been running for survival, but now he realized something larger was at stake. This was not just about him. It was about humanity. The countdown on the pod's display showed 5 seconds remaining for the pulse's effect. Lyra tapped a E button, scanning for residual threats. A few small Karen patrols remained on the station, immobilized by the pulse. Others had retreated. The pulse reached its peak and then began to fade. The station trembled one last time, and then silence fell. An eerie, complete silence broken only by the hum of the pod's engines. Ethan let out a long breath. "We did it. We survived." Lyra's gaze didn't leave the viewport. "We survived because we acted. Humans have that edge. Creativity, unpredictability, courage. That's what the Karen never account for." Ethan nodded slowly. "They underestimated us." "Yes," she said quietly, "and that will be their mistake if they return." The pod approached a nearby human outpost orbiting a distant moon. As they docked, Ethan looked at Lyra again. She had kept him alive through battles he could never have imagined, guided him through danger, and ensured the pulse succeeded. She was more than a protector. She was a symbol of humanity's resilience. Once inside the outpost, Ethan took a moment to breathe. Engineers and security personnel hurried past, responding to reports of incoming pods. The station had been hit hard, but the survivors were safe. For now. Lyra stood beside him. "What happens next is up to you," she said. "You have knowledge the Karen want. Now it's your job to make sure they never get it." Ethan looked at her, understanding for the first time the magnitude of his work. I'll make sure humanity is ready." She nodded, a faint smile crossing her face. "Good. That's all I ever wanted." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the stars outside the outpost windows. The pulse had been more than a weapon. It had been proof. Humanity could survive, adapt, and fight back. Even against the most advanced hunters in the galaxy, they were not helpless. Ethan realized that the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while he felt hope. Humanity had been tested, and in the crucible of fear and battle, they had emerged stronger. Lyra finally spoke. "Rest now. Tomorrow we start preparing. The Karen will return eventually. But next, time will be ready? Together." Ethan nodded. For the first time he understood. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humans, despite their fragility, were capable of facing the impossible and winning. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and distant. But inside the outpost, humans had light, life, and courage. They had survived Solace 12, and they had survived the Karen. And somewhere deep in his chest, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Humanity's story was just beginning. The pulse had not only saved them, it had awakened them. And in the silent depths of space, a new chapter for humanity began.